Oh, wait a minute, Jafar. What if you were the chump husband?
What?
Okay, you marry the princess, all right? And you become the sultan.
Marry the shrew. I become the sultan? The idea has merit.
Yes, merit, yes! And then we drop Papa-in-law and the little woman off a cliff. Yeah!
On April 12, 2022, Gilbert Gottfried, the legendary comedian and actor known for his distinctive voice and fearless humor, who delighted in shocking audiences with his raunchy material, died of a heart arrhythmia brought on by a muscular disorder called type 2 myotonic dystrophy, a rare, often debilitating condition that causes muscle atrophy and frequently leads to heart failure. Myotonic dystrophy's symptoms usually take years to present as affected muscle tissue and bodily systems slowly degenerate, leading to a gradual increase in pain that is typically most pronounced in the abdomen and chest. Indeed, you can see the impact of the condition on Gottfried in videos of his stand-up routines throughout the 2010s, as his on-stage performances became less animated and his once manic hand gestures became more subdued. Eventually, those afflicted with the condition often begin to suffer, as Gottfried did, with cardiac ailments as the heart muscle weakens, leading to just the type of arrhythmia that took Gilbert's life. Gottfried was first diagnosed with the condition many years before he died, but he seems to have told no one except for his family. Indeed, despite living his entire adult life in the public eye, Gottfried had always kept his personal life private, and for that reason he went to great lengths to shield his illness from the public. By early 2021, Gottfried's condition was substantially advanced, and despite the fact that his comedy peers began returning to the stage after a year of pandemic lockdowns, Gottfried remained at home. For the first time since he was 15 years old, he stopped doing live comedy, and his few acting credits after 2020 were exclusively for voiceover work he was able to do from his house. But by early 2022, with full knowledge that his illness had taken control of his body and that the end was not far off, Gottfried re-emerged to make a series of public appearances at comedy clubs in New York and Las Vegas. Despite his condition and the years away from the stage, he displayed the same sharp wit and fearless humor that had always characterized his comedy. His final stand-up set was at the Laugh Factory in Las Vegas, and the audience, unaware of the severity of his condition, was in stitches, delighted by his sharp observations and boundary-pushing jokes, and Gottfried beamed, reveling in the laughter and shock of the people who had come to see him. But the triumphs were short-lived. On March 11, 2022, Gottfried's condition worsened, and he checked himself into Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan, accompanied by his wife and 2 children. Despite his grave condition, Gottfried's spirit remained intact, and his 13-year-old son Max later recounted that as his family huddled around his father's hospital bed that night, they shared stories and made each other laugh, and invited the hospital staff in to laugh along with them. Gottfried once said, "I don't think there's a better feeling than making someone laugh. I get a tremendous amount of joy and satisfaction out of that. It's probably one of the best feelings in the world." And that remained true to the very end. On the morning of April 12th, with his family by his side, he passed away in his sleep. Gilbert Gottfried was 67 years old. I'm Jason Beckerman.
I'm Derek Kaufman.
This is Last Days, Gilbert Gottfried.
For Gilbert Gottfried, comedy had to risk being offensive. It needed to have that edge of danger that defied polite expectations. He said, quote, "I've always felt that comedy should shock, surprise, and sometimes even offend. It's about making people laugh at things they're not supposed to laugh at." He joked about natural disasters and acts of terrorism, about sex and death, incest and pedophilia, and made fun of the physical and mental ailments of his fellow comics and actors. Gottfried's humor was not for everyone. Many people found his shrill voice just unbearable, and he was criticized for being too crude, offensive, or inappropriate, and for his comedic hostility toward religion. His response, quote, "If someone gets offended, they should just turn it off. They shouldn't listen." As a kid, Gottfried idolized Lenny Bruce and Richard Pryor, both of whom defied convention and tackled difficult subjects with humor and honesty. He purposely mimicked their unapologetic approach, which quickly garnered Gottfried a devoted and adoring fan base, as well as the absolute reverence of his comedy peers. In 1998, Gottfried's longtime friend Bob Saget nicknamed Gottfried the comedian's comedian because of how respected he was in the industry. More than any other comic of his age, Saget said, Gilbert was willing to tell jokes on topics few others would dare to touch. Chris Rock called Gottfried one of the bravest comedians out there. He never shied away from a joke, no matter how controversial. He made us laugh and think. And that's what great comedians do. He was a singular giant in the comedy world. And Louis C.K. said he was, quote, uniquely brilliant, like no one else I've ever known. Gilbert's comedy was always so pure and unapologetic. He had this incredible ability to say the unsayable and make it hilarious. And Jason, I wanted to pause on this because the laundry list of people I've just mentioned are some of the greatest comedy minds to have ever lived. You're talking about Chris Rock saying these things, Louis C.K. saying these things. These are comedians, and they only show respect for the best of the best. And I think it's easy to dismiss someone like Gilbert Gottfried because he had that iconic voice as sort of a gimmick, but he wasn't. Amongst comedians, he was a true talent, and they all recognize it, even if, people my age think of, he's the voice from Aladdin or something.
There was a temptation in putting this together to quote dozens of comedians because every comedian you can name, the biggest of the big, Chappelle, Seinfeld, on, all respect Gilbert Gottfried. Now, there are people like Chris Rock and Jerry Seinfeld who are not nearly as filthy. They don't sort of play in that sandbox. Louis C.K. does. He's a filthy comedian.
And Bob Saget certainly is sort of the spiritual cousin of someone like Gilbert Gottfried.
But it also goes to like Jeff Ross and Lisa Lampanelli and Nikki Glazer and all these people who have sort of taken the mantle of the filthy comedian to great effect. All of them across the comedy spectrum loved Gilbert Gottfried, which was something surprising to me because he was I would never have thought of him in that echelon of those.
Yeah,
folks.
You don't think of him on the Mount Rushmore, but they're also deeply reverential of what he was doing, even if they weren't doing it themselves. Because you're right, Jerry Seinfeld barely says a swear word in his entire set,
right.
But he knew that this is the essence, the core of comedy, and he was deeply respected for it. And there may have never been a filthier comic than Gottfried. No joke went too far or was too soon. No subject was off limits, and no celebrity was too big to be taken down a peg. And during one of his many appearances on Hollywood Squares in the 1990s, Gottfried was asked by the host, quote, "What mammal has the largest eyes?" And without missing a beat, he answered, "Marlon Brando at a buffet." Brando complained to the show's producers, which only caused Gottfried to make it a point to poke fun of Brando as often as possible from that point on. And this really set the stage for who Gilbert Gottfried was in the popular conscious after this moment.
So Gottfried was a staple of the comedy roast scene, this exact kind of thing, right? Willingness to make fun of big celebrities. It's essential for the comedy roast scene. We all watch these things on Comedy Central now. The old Friars roast is now in a new incarnation. The big one, Tom Brady, came out recently. These were huge in the 1990s and 2000s. Gottfried was a staple in them. And it's a setting where comedians are encouraged to deliver the filthiest imaginable joke at the expense of their targets who are there right next to them. And nobody was filthier or funnier than Gottfried. Derek, when we do these podcasts, whether it be a musician or a movie star or a comedian, we try to find things out there that tell their story, clips from their movies, their songs, their comedy stand-up routines. And we build on them to show like what made them funny, what their style was, what made them special. With Gilbert Gottfried, there's tons of stuff out there, but I know we're allowed to swear on this podcast, but I honestly couldn't. There was a lot that you just can't bring up. These comedy roasts were the filthiest things. I mean,
you can't see this here, but Jason is turning red, and it's hard to make Jason blush over sort of something that's filthy or comedic.
No comedy bothers me at all. Everything goes, but his style was so filthy, and like even we'll describe a little bit about what he said, but like if you have kids in the car, stop right now because even just the descriptions of what he included in here are incredibly filthy. I mean, everything from Carrie Fisher just being a horrible drug addict and making fun of her. She's 10 feet from him on stage, and he's saying it to.
It's one thing to say you push the envelope. He really specifically targeted topics that were kind of sacred cows or untouchable. That's what made him tick. And if he could find something that was a sensitivity, like you said, Carrie Fisher's drug use was a sad topic for most people, and most people would want to tap dance around it or maybe eschew it. He would ride straight into it.
He sure would. A couple of examples. They're both dirty, but they're not nearly on the scale of what he often did. Here's a joke that he told at the expense of Roseanne Barr. And don't forget, he's standing not 10 feet from Roseanne while he's telling this joke.
A drunken farmer stumbles upstairs into his bedroom, waking his wife, Roseanne. She sits up and sees her husband holding a sheep under his arm. The farmer yells, This is the pig I've been fucking. Roseanne says, you idiot. That's not a pig, it's a sheep. The farmer yells, shut the fuck up, I was talking to the sheep.
And just one more. This is back in 2011 at the roast of Donald Trump, standing right next to our future president, a man who's not always that likely to take a joke very well.
Maybe a little thin-skinned at times.
But here's what Gilbert Gottfried said.
Donald always says money can't buy happiness, but it can buy the best Eastern European whores New York City has to offer.
And despite his notoriously filthy brand of comedy, he managed to secure work on TV, movies, and commercials throughout the early part of his career, including a turbulent, short-lived stint on Saturday Night Live in 1980, a brief appearance alongside Eddie Murphy in Beverly Hills Cop in 1984, and a more prominent role in Problem Child 1 and 2 with John Ritter in 1990 and 91. But his first real taste of mainstream success came in 1992 when he landed the role of Iago, the loudmouth, scheming parrot sidekick of the villain Jafar in the Disney classic Aladdin. And though the movie was animated, Gottfried was able to leverage the worldwide press tour alongside Robin Williams, who played the genie, then one of the biggest stars in the world, to obtain legitimate mainstream fame. And as Iago, Gottfried showcased versatility as a voice actor and set the course for the next 3 decades, when he became one of the most successful and recognizable voice actors in Hollywood.
This is when I first became really familiar with who Gilbert Gottfried was. I knew him from Beverly Hills Cop. I didn't remember him from SNL. But this is where I really came to know who he was, because the movie was enormous and the press tour was huge. And there was now a face with this voice that everybody was now familiar with.
He's iconic, and you can't minimize the timing of this. This is 1992, and he is a supporting character in the movie, but if you watch Aladdin, other than Robin Williams' performance with his motor mouth genie, he steals the show.
Absolutely.
And it set the stage for what younger generations see as, Donkey in Shrek. Eddie Murphy did the voice of Donkey, stole the show in Shrek from Mike Myers, many people would say. James Earl Jones as Mufasa, not a lead character in The Lion King 2 years later, 1994, also iconic.
The most memorable voice roles in those respective pictures. That's right.
It started with Gilbert Gottfried 2 years earlier in Aladdin. But for the success and notoriety that it brought him, Gottfried's unapologetic style of comedy didn't always work to his benefit. He was booted from Saturday Night Live in 1980 after just 12 episodes because he found it impossible to create characters suitable for network television. He was just too filthy, his brain would go in those directions, and It's hard to do mainstream television even that late at night. In 1991, Gottfried was a presenter at the Emmys just 2 months after Paul Reubens, Pee Wee Herman, was caught masturbating inside an adult theater in Florida. Gottfried, who had edged Paul Reubens out for a slot on the cast of Saturday Night Live years earlier, was told by producers just to go out there and have fun, but he just couldn't resist. He referenced Pee Wee and then said, quote, "If masturbation is a crime, I should be on death row. If masturbation is against the law, I should have been sent to the electric chair years ago." He continued along that vein for more than another minute, and saying at one point that constant masturbation had improved his grip strength so much that he could crush a lump of coal into a diamond. It's unbelievable. This was a time when there was just more propriety. So the Pee Wee Herman story was huge. It was obviously titillating for all the reasons that are very obvious now. But everyone that was thinking of these things wasn't saying it. And then Gottfried gets out there and does about 3 minutes of masturbation jokes that are on everyone's mind, and he just slays.
By today's standards, what he was saying about masturbation is
it's
really
tame by today.
It's tame. I mean, it's still, the Emmys might look askew at it, but it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But the FCC was pissed off. The Fox network that aired it was pissed off.
This was when The Simpsons were edgy and the FCC was all over Fox.
Well, he pointed out that a couple of years later, the Seinfeld masturbation episode becomes maybe the most famous episode of comedic sitcom history.
Right. Master of their domain.
That's right. Yeah. And he had gotten all this heat for telling these jokes during the Emmys. Now, the Emmys are very family friendly, that sort of thing. But one conservative commentator said what Gilbert did was a sneak attack on the unsuspecting American public. And I got to tell you, Gilbert Gottfried, he didn't like the criticism, but at the same time, he leaned into it. This was not something he was going to shy away from.
I love this stuff. It's sort of reminiscent of when we did the episode about Norm Macdonald at the ESPYs, when he made the OJ jokes. Gilbert was doing this, and those, to me, were the most daring and exciting comedians. That's what comedy was.
So then he builds on this, and during the Friars Club roast of Hugh Hefner in September 2001, this is just days after the tragic events of 9/11, when sensitivities were very high and the nation was mourning, Gottfried attempted to lighten the mood with a joke about his flight from New York to L.A., saying, quote, "I have to leave early tonight. I have a flight to California. I couldn't get a direct flight. They said they have to stop at the Empire State Building first." Even 23 years later, it's hard
It's
to
strange to
say
even read
out loud. Yeah. The joke was met with boos and calls of too soon from the audience, who found the 9/11 reference way too soon, too raw, too offensive. And faced with the negative reaction, Gottfried decided on the spot, while standing at the dais, to pivot and tell a joke. It's called the aristocrats joke. It's a long-standing, notoriously obscene joke among comedians, typically not shared with the general public due to its explicit content. If you haven't heard this joke, you can go out and read it. It is
Launched a whole documentary.
It did indeed. It is, I think, the filthiest collection of words ever strung together, maybe in the history of the English language. It is that disgusting. It's also, the punchline is not remotely funny. It's
No.
just not funny.
It's just
at
the
all.
journey of the joke.
It's just the journey. And Gottfried's telling of the joke at that moment where the crowd is turned against him, they are booing him, and he, without telling anybody what he's going to do, all of a sudden just starts telling a joke. Most people don't know where it's headed. The joke goes on for 5-6 minutes. It is spellbinding, and it succeeded, weirdly, in bringing the audience back to his side. Like you said, a few years later, there was a documentary about the moment, about his telling of the 9/11 joke, the booze, his telling of the aristocrats joke, where that joke came from, why it's so famous among comedians, because it is sort of the dirtiest, filthiest, again, like I said, the dirtiest words ever strung together.
I think the term brilliant is thrown around way too casually, but given the moment of being in front of an audience that is lustily booing you over a 9/11 joke, and to have the wherewithal in that moment to pivot to something that comedians all love. It is not funny in the traditional sense, but it's like jazz to comedians. It's how you tell the joke.
Right.
They all tell it differently. They add different embellishments. And being Gilbert Gottfried, who already had a reputation as a filthy comedian, to get up there and do that during that moment to win a crowd back that was mad at him. I mean, there was real anger over that joke because
It's New York City. There are people
3,000
in that
people that
room
died.
Everybody in that room knew somebody who had died, maybe had family members who had died, and they came there to get away from this. The one joke that nobody was able to tell right in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 was anything about the 9/11 attacks.
Yeah.
And he just goes for it.
There's just a beauty to what he's doing, and it has become one of the most legendary moments in comedy, period, of the 20th century, or 21st century, actually. It happened after 9/11, but it's an incredible thing to behold. In the documentary, I recommend it if you haven't seen it.
As he had with the Emmys before, he did pay a professional price for this. He lost out on comedy gigs and commercial endorsements. He was a bit toxic, but once again, his career quickly recovered, and he proceeded to go on the best 10-year run of his career. Despite the controversies, or maybe partially because of them, he became one of the most well-known comics in the country, landing scores of movies and TV roles, hosting one-man televised comedy specials, and reportedly becoming the highest-paid voice actor in Hollywood. His distinctive voice remained the centerpiece of his fame, including by earning him a lucrative endorsement contract as the voice of the Aflac Duck, for which he was reportedly paid $500,000 per year to literally say one word over and over again.
Aflac.
But much of Gottfried's success came to a screeching halt in 2011, following the earthquake and tsunami near Fukushima, Japan, that killed an estimated 18,000 people. At the height of the ongoing tragedy, Gottfried unleashed a flurry of 12 tweets poking fun at Japan with things like, quote, "I just broke up with my girlfriend, but like the Japanese say, there'll be another one floating by any minute now." And, quote, "Japan is really advanced. They don't go to the beach comes to them." And again, and it must have been just absolutely sort of too tempting for him. He had already survived the 9/11 joke. He sees another tragedy. Like I said, Gilbert Gottfried runs towards controversy. And again, people came for him. And this time, he couldn't tell a filthy joke to make things better like he did with the aristocrats on stage that night. Gottfried initially offered an apology in an effort to save his Aflac job and restore his public image somewhat, in which he acknowledged the offensive nature of his tweets and expressed regret for the harm they caused. But then Aflac, which unbeknownst to Gottfried did 75% of its business in Japan, summarily fired him. 2 days later, Gottfried took the gloves off, went on Joy Behar's talk show and rescinded his apology and really dug in. And in doing so, he shared with the audience what many comics have always professed: nothing is off limits in comedy.
And the media kept saying, and these insensitive comments and remarks. You know, they wouldn't call them jokes, because if you say jokes, people go, yeah, jokes. And then they go, well, they were jokes. A comedian said that. Well, that's what comedians do. But they were kind of on the tasteless side. But this was Gilbert Gottfried, right? Has he ever said something tasteful?
No.
No. So what is the actual news item here? Yeah,
So in your mind, Gelly, is there anything off limits in comedy?
No.
There's nothing.
No. If you were to drop dead right now,
you'd make a joke.
I'd turn to the camera, I'd have an hour on it.
So we've had this discussion many times in the office, Derek, because we have covered people who have been canceled because they told a really dirty joke or because they told a really offensive joke. And what's your personal, what do you think of this assertion that nothing is off limits in comedy? Is it possible to ever go too far?
We've talked a lot about this, and I think you and I are similar in our feelings about this. I'd say you're a little bit more absolutist than I am. You think comedy is, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is anything is within range. As long as you're telling a joke, your intent is to tell a joke, and so we shouldn't put anything off limits. No sacred cows. I think there are some consequences to your actions that are okay to be consequences. And Gilbert Gottfried is the guy who sort of went there on everything. And when he told the Fukushima tweets, he was running a risk. He walked that tightrope. He suffered severe economic consequences as a result of it. Am I okay with it and its impact on comedy? Not really, but I understand the position Aflac was in. They can't really have a spokesperson when they do such a large portion of their business in Japan.
Aflac had to fire him.
They had to act.
It doesn't, like, I think we're in agreement. Like, anything goes in comedy in my book, but there are consequences. And if you're going to be the Aflac spokesperson with that much business in Japan and do something that offends Japanese people, Aflac's going to lose business if they keep you on. So they also have no choice. They've got to fire you. And that's okay too.
Yes.
And Gilbert Gottfried goes into it knowing that that's a possibility. Now, he did point out, Gottfried did, that they then went and hired somebody who sounded exactly like him. And so therefore it was clearly just a face-saving effort by Aflac, but that's okay. Companies have to meet their bottom line and answer to their shareholders and their boards of directors who are pissed off, and that's the consequence.
Here's what I love about, truly it was an act of bravery in some sense, because the blowback he got from 9/11, he had to know that there was a potential he would get blowback for these Fukushima jokes, and he did, and he suffered, but he sort of dug in and said, I'm a comedy purist, and you can say these things, and what I like most about what he said is, Gilbert Gottfried's a well-known, he's a Jewish man, and he was a man of some faith, although very, very irreverent. And he said, I would do Holocaust jokes. And he's saying nothing you can say is going to offend me. I'm willing to make jokes even about the biggest tragedy of my own people. And I did this about Japanese people. Yeah. I'm clearly not racist or mean-spirited about it. I'm a comedian.
That's right. Despite the professional setback and the loss of what had to be the best-paying job in the history of television for the amount of work it required, Gottfried managed to continue his career by leveraging his established reputation, demonstrating his continued resilience in the face of controversy. Gottfried's unique comedic style and distinctive voice had already earned him a dedicated following, which proved instrumental in saving his career in the wake of the Aflac mess. He capitalized on his notoriety and cultivated a persona that thrived on edgy humor, leaning in on his reputation for walking a fine line between comedy and controversy. This approach, though risky, resonated with many fans who appreciated his unapologetic and bold sense of humor. It's what allowed him to come back from controversy over and over again.
And even as his physical condition worsened through the last decade of his life, Gottfried worked constantly, appearing in more than 70 movies and TV shows throughout the 2010s, while continuing the torrid pace of onstage comedy work. His perseverance was remarkable, showcasing his commitment to the craft and his love for entertaining audiences. Whether voicing animated characters, appearing on television shows, or performing stand-up routines, Gottfried remained a ubiquitous figure in the comedy world.
There's no reason he should have been this famous, right?
It's a remarkable triumph. It just is, because the voice itself, people's mileage on it may vary, but over time it grates on you. It's a very strange thing to listen to for long stretches of time. And stand-up comedy is something where you're on stage for a half hour to an hour to maybe even more than that. And nevertheless, because the content was so good, because he was so sharp and so smart and so good-spirited. I really think when you say mean-spirited jokes in a good-spirited way, you get away with a lot. And there's just something lovable about him. He was menchie.
He's got the shrill voice. He's kind of funny-looking. He's not a handsome guy, but he nevertheless just continued to pound through, regardless of the challenges he faced. He was just a testament to his resilience and determination.
Stayed extremely relevant. That was the big point you made.
And his comedy styling didn't change. He didn't evolve over time. He kept telling, different jokes based on the time period, but basically the same joke over and over again.
He waited for people to come to him.
That's right. Gottfried once said, quote, "Comedy has always been my life. From the moment I first got on stage, I knew this was what I was meant to do. It's not just a job, it's who I am. But according to the people who knew Gilbert Gottfried best, that doesn't do him justice." Comedians Bob Saget, Artie Lang, and Penn Jillette said that Gilbert's on-stage manic persona and irreverent comedy hit a quiet, understated, and devoted husband and father. The day he died, his wife, Dara, didn't focus on his comedy, instead referring to him as the best father. She said he loved our kids more than anything in the whole world. He would paint Lily's nails and put little notes with monster drawings in Max's lunchbox. She continued, "Although today is a sad day for all of us, please keep laughing as loud as possible in Gilbert's honor." Gilbert's close friend and fellow comedy roaster Jeff Ross eulogized Gilbert at his funeral. It was a private affair closed to cameras, just how Gilbert would have wanted it. But a few weeks later, Ross gave a taste of what he had said on Conan O'Brien's podcast. What Ross said was an appropriately hilarious and filthy send-off for Gottfried, but most of all it confirmed what a wonderful man he really was. And we'll give Jeff Ross the final word.
He was one of a kind. Talk about fearless. I spoke at his funeral, and one thing that I said that day that, he did this joke on my Netflix Bumping Mike special about skull fucking his dead grandma. So now I'm at his funeral.
That old chestnut.
Now I'm at his funeral, and I'm looking at his wife, and he has kids, a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, and he had this whole other side to him. And I know that both sides of Gilbert. So here I am at his funeral, and I'm talking about how Gilbert's comedy is fearless and subversive, but yet he was so lovable, he could get us to laugh at a joke about skull fucking a dead person. Then I looked at his coffin and said, "Not so funny now, huh, Gilbert?" Very loud. And a wonderful, wonderful person, a unique person, a one-of-a-kind type of individual, and he will be missed.